Folks, my first role as a developer, I believe I was trying to do a day one commit. And I ran my unit tests and I got back that 223 tests were failing. I'll always remember that number because I went to my senior developer, my mentor, and I said, yeah, I broke a couple of the unit tests with my commit. And she said, how many did you break? And I was like, oh, 223. And she said, what I said was, I said a couple hundred. And she said, how many exactly did you break? And I said, oh boy, she's more upset with me than I thought. 223. And she says, oh, that's fine. 223 are always broken. If it had been 224 or 220, that would have been a problem. But 223 is fine. You're ready to go and commit. That is always a better thing to start with than I think we're live. So I didn't say I think we're live, but that really doesn't have much to do with what we're talking about today. We're talking about OpenTelemetry and machine learning with my guest, and I'm going to point in the right direction, even though there's the whole mirror effect. I got it. We have Nir here today. Nir, say hi to the people. Tell us something about Traceloop. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Nir. I'm the CEO of Traceloop. We're a YC company. We did YC Window 23, and we are focusing on building a tool for monitoring and evaluation for large language models.
And I love that. I think this is such a great topic because OpenTelemetry is this tool to have a very standard way to monitor how our software is running in production. And one of the things that is always been able to do is tell you how much your resource usage is. But for web applications, right, in general, if we have massive growth of users, we're not terribly concerned about resource usage, right? We're thinking, yeah, they're using the amount of bandwidth they're using, they're usually doing okay. But obviously, out of the machine learning space, this is a huge concern, right? Is stuff growing totally out of proportion?
Yeah, I think specifically around evaluation, I think this is the most complex part, and it still hasn't been resolved for large language models or generative AI in general. So if you look at traditional machine learning, you always had these set of metrics which were sort of like your northern light, like guiding you towards what's right and wrong. You knew, okay, I need to make my precision better. I need to make my recall better. But then came Gen AI, and you build a prompt, or you're working with this model, and you get a response. And you have no idea whether this response was better than the previous one, other than just looking at it with your human eyes and saying, okay, this looks better. I think this looks more accurate.
Yeah. And a massive thing is that, and I became aware of this when I first saw the fantastically named OpenLLMetry, is, you just have the very basic thing of, you can say, hey, resource usage looks good. We're getting good precision out of this. But the fact is that when you sit down and realize, oh, I am just sort of manually examining like my AWS billing to see if I'm doing well, like that's a concern. But then obviously, yeah, it's like, what's the quality that we're getting out as well is another big piece. Yeah. So I love this topic. I love that we're talking about this. And I wrote a whole bunch of questions because I was very curious. I will say we were going to have a great demo of using SigNoz to do this monitoring. We've had a little bit of like a technical limitation today, so we are going to do that as a separate segment that you'll see go live probably next week or shortly. We'll try to get it out before KubeCon, folks. We'll try to make that happen. But this is going to be the Q&A portion. We'll do our demo portion very soon. But I wanted to start with, I have my questions here, and you can read them now if you're a visual learner. But talk to me about the decision to use OpenTelemetry on top of, as your basis for these tools. And I'm curious about that because I think a lot of people do associate OpenTelemetry with like a web request, event-based framework, which is not what we're working with here.
So we're huge fans of OpenTelemetry. We've been using it for years. I used to be chief architect at Fiverr, and we integrated OpenTelemetry into Fiverr.
That's right. I forgot that Fiverr was like an early OpenTelemetry shop. That's really, really cool. Sorry, go ahead.
So we're huge fans of OpenTelemetry, and And I think when we started working with large language models, when we build these pipelines, like RAG pipelines, where you have a vector database, you retrieve data, and then you use it to build the prompt that you send to OpenAI, for example, then it really makes sense. It feels like it's like a trace. It's like a trace that you have in OpenTelemetry. Mm-hmm. So it's really natural to just use OpenTelemetry to export this data and visualize it. So for us, it was the easiest decision to just use OpenTelemetry because it's easier to build a tracing dashboard using OpenTelemetry rather than starting from scratch.
Yeah, I love that. On our community Slack for SigNoz, we'll have these conversations where someone's like, well, is it compatible? Is your dashboard compatible with this specific library that generates metrics? And I understand where they're coming from because I've been working in observability for a very long time. And I totally remember when that was the case. Where it was like, oh yeah, you have this one library to do this one piece. For example, like database indexing is an example of like this, not very event-based or request-based in that example. Oh, it's generating these metrics. Is that compatible with my observability dashboard? And of course you find out, no, it won't handle those kinds of metrics. These days now, right, in the OpenTelemetry space, like, hey, well, will it report to the OpenTelemetry collector? Yes, then yes, right? Yeah. If no, then no. But generally the answer is yes, right? There's some kind of ingestion tool for it. But you're totally right that the actual like giving a prompt, adding a single vector, and getting back a response, that does look like a trace, right? That does have a request response pattern to it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I apologize. This is my own ignorance. I think of using when someone says monitoring for LLMs, I think of it as monitoring for like the construction phase, the learning phase. But we're also talking about monitoring, yes, like how well is it actually performing to answer questions? How well is it actually functioning, that model once it's built? Okay, fantastic. All right, so talk to me a little bit about the limitations of existing tools. And we're not trying to embarrass anybody, but just, this is new technology. So, of course, there's limitations of what's out there.
So I think the thing I like the most about OpenTelemetry, or a lot of things, but the thing that I like the most is auto-instrumentation. So you don't do anything. You just initialize the standard OpenTelemetry SDK, and you immediately get visibility into HTTP calls you have in your system, database calls, whatever you want. So we wanted to have the same experience with LLMs. Right now, existing tools that you have with for observability for LLMs require you to manually log and specify in your code where you call OpenAI or like replace the OpenAI API with some other proprietary API, which is like a lot of work if you have a significant code base already using LLMs. What's great about OpenTelemetry is that you get a great infrastructure for auto-instrumenting these calls. So basically, we got to a point where you just add one line of code and you get instant visibility into your vector database call, LLM calls, length chain, whatever you want.
Yeah, and this is such a big piece with OpenTelemetry, right? Is that this context propagation and automatic instrumentation is fantastic. So a lot of the early tools for, hey, we're going to add observability to this, IoT is another example I can think of, tend to be these very like single-use tools, right? Where it's like, it's a specific dashboard, it's a specific call, and first of all, that's limited in and of itself. But yeah, also you'll see where it's like, oh no, we're fully bought in on this technology. So we have 500 calls for it across the code base. It's like, well, that's going to be a tough sell.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, this gets us this question. We sort of answered this a little bit, right? It's like, how do we handle tracing the entire system execution, not just the model?
So because we're using OpenTelemetry, okay, we need to instrument, we need to log calls to like Pinecone and OpenAI, but if you also use some database, some Postgres database in your system as part of the LLM chain or workflow, then you just get it out of the box because you're using OpenTelemetry. OpenTelemetry already instruments a lot of standard libraries. So if you're using, requests in Python, then you get this visibility out of the box. You don't need to do anything.
Yeah, and that's definitely been my experience as well. In that, even if you have something like Très Bizarre, right, you're doing some very interesting thing. My example is like re-indexing your database. Something like you can just add a couple of lines of code and add it to your traces or add metrics for it. If you're bought into that context. Now, one of the things that we have seen people kind of are still dealing with, I want to say almost like the fallout from or the bad memories of, is this issue with like really extreme vendor lock-in, where they got bought into an observability tool, to a DB tool, and they're completely stuck on that model. One of the things you've mentioned is that you are seeing some growth with, for example, people saying, "Hey, I want to move beyond OpenAI, or I want to integrate this other tool," and lock-in has been more limited. So how do you feel like that's a concern that you're addressing with this tool?
So I think, and this was one of the points I made when I did a show Hacker News post a few weeks ago, is that I think OpenTelemetry did a great thing to the traditional like microservice cloud observability world. When 10 years ago or 5 years ago, you needed to install DataDog agent, and then you were locked into DataDog for life. Like switching to another observability platform was a lot of work. And then came OpenTelemetry, and it basically gave you the freedom to choose. I want to use DataDog, I want to use New Relic, I want to use Sentry, whatever I want to use. I want to use all of them. So we can use the same technology, the same idea to do the same with large language models. Just use OpenTelemetry as a standard, then you can connect it also to those traditional observability platforms, but also to the new ones that are specializing in evaluation and monitoring for large language models. And when you talk to a lot of companies, many companies, when they just starting out, they still want to use their existing observability tools. They don't want to switch to a new one. Only when they start to using LLMs in a more advanced way, then they're looking for more sophisticated, specific solutions for LLMs.
And by the way, I want to thank you so much. We drafted a few questions, and I said, "Oh, here's what I want to ask you." And thank you so much for rolling with me, like completely changing the sequence on you. I feel so bad about this. This is like 2 or 3 years ago. I had a great guest, very, very knowledgeable, who had rehearsed the questions in order, and was super disappointed that I was like, well, naturally, what you just said leads me into this question 12 on the sheet, which was not question 2. And I felt bad, but I want to talk about, can you talk a little bit about some of the technical challenges that you faced? I think that, the very basic request modeling, the concept of tracing, right, can make sense here, but I'm sure there was a little bit of challenge doing that translation.
I think OpenTelemetry is a great technology as a user, as like a consumer, someone who's just using it. But if you're developing around it, it's very complex. So we were already knowledgeable of OpenTelemetry, but there was a steep learning curve into understanding of how do we build custom instrumentations to OpenTelemetry? How do you connect it to this LLM ecosystem? I think it's a complex technology. It's evolving all the time. It's still very young, and there's a steep learning curve to learn how to work with it properly.
Yeah, I definitely, one of the things I was looking at this month, and I actually have not gone all the way to testing that myself, that Hazel Weekly was talking about how you can't actually connect trace bands after the fact on the collector side. And I had just been working with the transform language. I've been doing all the stuff, I've been writing about it, and I had missed, like you don't notice an absence, right? You're like, oh, you can transform this value, you can add attributes this way, you can remove attributes, and I had missed like, oh right, yeah, you can't go ahead and connect these spans. And I just think like it's a perfect example where a lot of the people using this really are pretty expert at it. They've been working in large enterprises. They've been working with this code base for a long time. And so, they know about these limitations, but it's not the first thing that occurs to you to document. So that is really a thing. And it's something that, while I don't claim to be a technical wizard, it is the thing that I'm trying to work on with the project, is finding places where we can put something out, either changing the documentation or writing guides to help people get more into it. But once you're trying to develop against it, yeah, it's definitely an advanced tool.
Yeah.
By the way, I shared the link to the show Hacker News if y'all want to check out that thread. That's a great place to get a primer, and also to see kind of what's on people's minds and what they're interested in. Hacker News is always interesting. It's an interesting bunch, isn't it? It's an interesting crowd that shows up. I always say, like, it can be very hard to get their interest and to get, people excited. But boy, once you do, the people really they crack their knuckles. They're like, hey, I deployed it this morning and I'm checking it out. And I'm,
exactly.
The number of people who move from clicked on it, read the README to like downloaded, deployed it, ran it, it's like high, submitted a GitHub issue in the first week. You're like, oh, fantastic. So right now, it provides instrumentation for specific models like OpenAI, Anthropic, and Cohere. Are there plans to extend into other machine learning models in the future?
Yes, we already are supporting the transformers module from Hugging Face. We're adding ones every day. So if you go, I'm guessing that you took this list.
I got it from the comments. I was gonna even proceed it with like, I got this from the Hacker News comments. Yeah. I didn't go try it out on every integration to start with.
So yeah, we're constantly adding more and more instrumentations. We plan to support everything in the ecosystem. We already support, except for this, we have Pinecone and ChromaDB as vector databases. We'll have others as well coming in soon. We're supporting LangChain as a framework for LLMs, and we basically support everything in this ecosystem because we want you to, if you're doing anything with LLMs, we want you to be able to observe everything with OpenLLMetry.
Yeah, and I guess this makes sense, right? If you're working off of APIs and you have sort of expected request and response structure, it shouldn't come to one where you're like, no, we can't instrument, right? Yeah. That API. It's like, well, that should be doable, right? Mm-hmm. And then lastly, before we go into, I'll probably cut these videos together, and we'll go into a demo of how this works. If you're watching this in a pre-recorded video, it'll seem like no time has passed at all, except we'll both have aged very slightly in the 2 weeks. Do you have advice for engineers who are considering, a lot of this tooling is really for people who are making use of these models within their products? Do you have advice for these engineers who are diving in, but they want to say, hey, I want to start asking these questions about security, compliance, observability, the sort of second order concerns that are kind of normal for an enterprise developer, developer on a mid-sized team?
I think this is something we keep hearing all the time. And I think, this is why I love SigNoz as well. I think you should always aspire to use as many open source tools as you can, because those can be easily deployed on-prem if you need to. And I think especially around large language models, we see a lot of larger companies that see privacy as a major concern for them, because these prompts that we are logging within the traces contain sometimes very, very sensitive data. They're like the most sensitive data for the organizations. So they can't just trust this information with anyone.
Yeah, when you see like sales relationships on the enterprise side or therapy questions on the personal side, it's like, wow, this is sort of the tip top, right? Like, tell me how many employees this company has, and you're sending this request from your enterprise, like, oh, right, the last thing that you want to see spread about or shared. So yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. Is that talking about self-hosting and talking about those open source tools makes a ton of sense for looking at those as I wouldn't even say fallbacks, as alternatives for how you're modeling certain data. And one of the real strengths of OpenTelemetry, if you check out our last webinar where we talk about the collector architecture, one of the real strengths is, right, you can route data to multiple places. So a totally reasonable model is using a collector that you're running internally, saying, hey, these streams, let's go ahead and put it out to our public dashboard, our cloud service, whatever, because it's a RAM usage or something. It's fine, right? Yeah. But for this other stuff, which is maybe user analytics, prompt values, look at maybe sending that within your own network, right? And so you can have the same collector that's doing that kind of routing. Nir, this was such a great talk, and I can't wait for us to dive into a little demo of implementing it on your own set of tools, reporting some of the data over to SigNoz. But this has been fantastic. I'm gonna give the community, we're gonna give them like 4 or 5 minutes to see if they have questions they want to add in chat. But are there final thoughts? Are there things you'd like people to do first? We'll obviously share links to the tools down in the video description down below.
I think one of the questions that people keep asking us at this point is like, hey, why is this separate from OpenTelemetry? Are you planning on integrating it back to OpenTelemetry, like giving it back to the overall, like the bigger project? And so I think I've been contributing to the OpenTelemetry project by itself for a long time, and I can say that I'd love this to become part of OpenTelemetry at some point. But you have to understand that OpenTelemetry is a huge project with a lot of stakeholders and a lot of users who are using it outside of the LLM world, and it's hard to commit these, the semantic conventions we are defining, the instrumentations we are defining today into the main OpenTelemetry repo. This is like still evolving. We're still trying to figure out what's the right way to report the different prompts or different
I'll say
databases.
I'll say on that it's very open when you go and talk to the tags or the SIGs within the group. They're like, yeah, we want to see people doing instrumentation as separate projects, right? Because instrumentation is mainly like the core language projects, right? Yes, anybody can do a collector contrib, but this isn't that. This is new instrumentation. So I get where the question is sort of motivated from. That seems like one of the classic, like not to drag you communities, but the classic like hacker news and Reddit where it's like, well, why didn't you do it this way? You should have done it this way. You're like, well, but because that's not like they would have to approve that there's a whole new project within for instrumentation. So if you want to instrument your IoT stuff now, right, you're going to go find some, hey, this is Arduino instrumentation. It's not part of the OpenTelemetry project because they're not going to approve that right away, right? So yeah, I mean I get where the question is coming from, but I'm also like, yeah, it may surprise you that is how the project works, right? That it's very easy to contribute to the collector as like you have this one little library. But when you say, hey, I want to add instrumentation, the hope is that people would just do their own instrumentation as its own project. So yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense that it's early days, and so how it's going to be folded in and when it will be folded, that could be years down the line. I think that makes a ton of sense. Well, fantastic. We'll come back and do some demo stuff very soon. This has been great. Thank you for having such complete answers to these questions. I love that you're coming in with so much background and so much empathy for these users who are trying to like understand what's going on with these models and track what their actual usage is.
All right, so we're gonna do here a quick demo of OpenLLMetry. I've built here a really simple demo with Pinecone. So it's a RAG pipeline. It's based on a demo I saw on Pinecone website. I took a data set called LangChain Python docs. It's all the documentation of LangChain up to like I think June or May 2023. This is like I did it before this. I loaded it into the Pinecone database, and now it's ready to use. And if we go here, we can actually see it. This is like the set of documentations, all the docs you have on LangChain. On top of that, I built a really simple RAG pipeline. It allows you to ask questions on the LangChain documentation. Whenever you get a question, we go to Pinecone. We get the 5 most relevant documents from LangChain documentation, and then we call OpenAI with a prompt that contains all these documentation with the question the user asked, and that's it, and we print the answer. So we can actually like we can run it here and see the answer. It's called docs retrieval. It takes a while because OpenAI is slow.
Sure. This is like gotta be usage case number 1 for OpenTelemetry. It's like, hey, why has our service gotten so much slower? Well, I think it might be the API. Well, you can't prove that. Well,
yeah. So now we may ask, like, what was the slowest thing here? Was it like the querying Pinecone? Was it OpenAI? Was it the embedding call to OpenAI? I have no idea, right? But yeah, you can see the answer here. To give me a pretty good answer to the question was like, how do I build an agent with LangChain? There's like really good agent, give me a good answer, sorry, from the documentation. And yeah, we wanna see, okay, it took like I think like 8 or 10 seconds at least, maybe more. We wanna see, you know, why was it taking so much time? So let's install OpenLLMetry. And if we go to the documentation, it's pretty easy. I don't know if I need to zoom here.
Yeah, give me 1 step of zoom would be so great. That's Command+ if you're keyboard person. Yeah, that looks great. That looks great. Also, we'll share links to these docs too. So so please don't try to type the information that you're seeing in the video, but we get it. We get it.
Okay. So yeah, so we are gonna, so it's pretty easy. You install the Traceloop SDK, which wraps OpenLLMetry, and you initialize it. And because we're running locally, we're going to disable batch as well. So we're going to see the result. We're going to see.
Right. So this is a very basic thing with, if you're trying out instrumentation. If you start with a production style thing with batch responses, right, you're going to sit there sending requests for 5 minutes and see nothing, and you're going to think it's broken. You're going to go back and change your code. So you want your batching to be disabled, right?
Yeah, exactly.
To get that data.
Right, so let's do it here. I'm using Poetry. We'll install the Traceloop SDK, and after it's installed, we're going to go here to our docs retrieval pipeline, and we're going to import Traceloop SDK. Sorry.
I tell you a funny thing. I actually had not used like a code completion tool, like a modern code completion tool until this week. Because a friend asked me to try out their tool. And I was like, oh, this is very nice. Like, I was doing my imports and it said, do you want to import this other thing which you use later in your code? I was like, I was like, why are you telling me to import this random, like component? And then I saw like, oh, right, because I use it and I forgot to import it. Obviously, it was marked in the parser and stuff, but I was like, oh, that's pretty nice. Thank you. When you're first implementing OpenTelemetry instrumentation or other instrumentation, you want to turn off all batching that you can, right? Because you want to send one request and see it traced in your dashboard. Obviously, that's terrible production architecture, but you don't want to sit there reloading and have it take 5 minutes for any data to show up. So there we go. So it makes a ton of sense to disable our batching.
Exactly. So now I'm gonna first try with Traceloop. Let's open an account real quickly. And I'm going to sign up with my GitHub. All right, let's create an organization. All right. And then lastly, we're going to create an API key so we can use. We go here, click environments, generate an API key. Let's copy it. And pretty simply, I'm going to add it as an environment variable. And now let's run the same program again. And now we see the new line that says Traceloop exporting traces to api.traceloop.com.
Wow, you're able to get this with just an init call. Nice.
Right. Go back to the tracing screen here. And these are the traces. We can now see the call to OpenAI, and we can even see how much time it took. And we can see the call to Pinecone as well.
Nice.
But as you can see, it's not really a trace, right? You basically have like two disconnected spans. One is the call to Pinecone, one is the call to OpenAI. So it's good. You can see the prompt, but that's not enough. You want to see them like they're part of a RAG workflow. You want to see them together.
Yeah.
So for that, if you go to the Traceloop documentation, you see that we also recommend that you annotate your workflow so you can actually see a complete trace that is connected and not just, spans lying out there disconnected from each other. So to do that, it's really easy. We have a set of instrumentation. We have a set of annotations you can use, decorators. And what you do is you decorate the workflow, which is like the thing that like the overall process that you're running. So in our place would be like the function called ask question. So let's decorate it with the workflow decorator. And basically this is the main method that is calling the other method that like retrieves data from Pinecone and calls OpenAI. And then we'll annotate query LLM. This is one of the tasks that we have, which is the call to OpenAI. And the other one is retrieve docs, which is another task, which is retrieving the docs from Pinecone, sorry. We'll add the appropriate imports, save it, and rerun it.
All right, we don't need to send in a request because that was part of the script.
And now if we go back to the Traceloop dashboard, we're able to see a workflow, which is basically, okay, this is like, everything is connected now. You see the ask question, the two tasks,
nice.
the OpenAI calls. You can actually see that, okay, this took like 13 seconds, the overall workflow.
Yeah.
And from there, you can see that most of the time was spent doing actually calling OpenAI. And like the call to Pinecone was only like 1.6 seconds. Very quick. And sorry, this was also including the embedding call, but like actual call to Pinecone was like only 465 milliseconds.
Yeah, so this is offering real insight into when we're building AI integrated services, like what's actually going on, and not just looking at those separate spans. That's kind of a classic, right? It's like, hey, yeah, it's taking on average this, and then we're kind of trying to slice and dice that data to turn it into what does that actually mean for our users?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And because we're using OpenTelemetry, you can basically connect it to anything you want.
Yeah.
So if you go to our documentation, we have a section of integrations where, for example, you can see how we integrate with SigNoz and send the trace data to SigNoz. And we have like an explanation here. You basically need to set two environment variables. One is the base URL, which instructs the SDK to where to export all the traces. And we also need to authenticate with SigNoz.
This is such a thing to see that, in the OpenTelemetry world, right? If you're able to use OTLP, right, transit protocols, it's that easy, folks.
Yes.
Right? Like, hey, here's the ingestion point. We might want to set a service name. We'll see what service name it comes in with, right? But I mean, that was part of our core anyway. And that's it, folks.
So I have my SigNoz instance here already. So I'm going to settings, click on ingestion settings, and then I'm basically seeing here, no, it jumps.
Oh, this is our funny text sizing, right? Because we're trying to make the text size look right. And I always get this when I set it up to like 180 text zoom, right, to look right, and then it's like flashing between two margins on some interface. But yeah, so we get our ingestion keys. Don't send stuff to the Traceloop account, folks. Don't be weird. But yeah,
I'm gonna replace it. Don't worry.
Yeah, can we take a look at a couple of traces in the SigNoz dashboard?
So yeah,
let's go ahead and report it. Let's report it. Sorry, let's start there.
So they do remember, we need to set Traceloop base URL with this, right? And we need to do another export, which is Traceloop headers. This was all in the documentation, and let's copy the ingestion key from here, put it here.
By the way, just typing keys from memory it's acrobatics without a net folk to do that on a stream. But yeah, love it.
And that's it. Let's run the app again.
I would inevitably misspell access if I did that. I would spell access with a K somehow to make it not work for me. But yeah.
We can actually see that now we are sending
nice. Yeah.
And let's go back to SigNoz. Let's go to the traces. Let's wait a couple of seconds, and we're able to see the traces here.
Love this.
All right. And here you have it, the same traces we've seen in Traceloop. Now we can see it here, and you can see the workflow, the task, everything is here. And because OpenTelemetry is super standard, if you go, for example, to the call to OpenAI, you can actually see the prompts here. This is the prompt sent to OpenAI. And this is actually,
so these are already coming in as attributes, a big attribute, but amazing. Yeah, that is pretty nice. That is pretty nice. Yeah, and you think about this and you say, hey, now in the SigNoz dashboard, I can see our database access, our other queries, our queries to our user backend, all within the same line of traces, or we can see it separated out. I'm curious, what does it give it as if you click on services, what does it give it as a service name by default? Not bad. Not bad. Pretty good. But yeah, obviously you could add one more param to say, hey, I want to set the service name to be this.
Oh yeah, we have it. This is
Nice.
one of the parameters you have on the, if you initialize the Traceloop SDK, you can set.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, of course you can. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, this is the application name.
Nice.
I want to show one more thing, which is some people are lazy. They don't want to start annotating all their code.
Right.
Like,
yeah. It's a very clean method of annotation. And I'll note, but right. They're like, oh, I don't want to go in. And they start saying these things like, I don't want to do every method. It's like, well, it's not every method, but okay. Okay.
Yeah. But if you're using a framework, like LangChain and others, then basically you don't need to do anything because these frameworks, the ones I'm talking about, right? Now I need to open up because I forgot the names, but we are supporting. But like, LangChain, Haystack, LightLLM, Llama Index, all of these already have some structure in them. So basically what you can do, if you're using any of them, you don't need to do anything. So I have the same example of you've seen here. I've rewritten it with LangChain. And if you're using LangChain, we just copy and paste the same Traceloop initialization. So right, these like 2 lines, I'm just calling traceloop.init. And let's run it. That's the docs retrieval LangChain. And I don't need to do any annotations. I don't need to write anything. And because LangChain is really structured, we'll be able to figure out the exact structure of your program and the workflows and tasks that you have. Right, because we're going to do SigNoz, we'll be able to see it on SigNoz. Traces. Let's wait a second.
Okay, so we've got a couple of traces in on the dashboard to take a look at. Wow, and so these, we did not have to go in and actually hit those tasks. We just had to do it in Nir. That is pretty nice.
And you see the pinecone query, you see exactly like before, you see the OpenAI chat call, and you have all the prompts from before.
Yeah, and what I really notice is that the attributes that you're getting in are nicely labeled for their keys, so there's not like crazy key cardinality where it's like, sure, it's prompt 1 or prompt 2, but it's not like prompts.content.user.steve where it's like, hey, we're not gonna be able to track on this later.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. And we even have we have like total tokens. Oh, that's really, really nice. Wow, that's a lot of great data coming in. Sorry, got a couple of of course I see what happened. My hour of focus went away. All right, there we go. Back to no Slack notifications. I apologize to anybody watching this video who heard a Slack notification and immediately had that classic remote worker feeling of I gotta get to work. Oh no, I spent too much time watching a video. But this is really strong. I really love the idea of seeing your LLM performance completely integrated with your other trace views, and being able to grab these attributes really means that it's possible to do queries against these traces right in our query builder, which we'll have to demo at some point. That's really, really neat. But yeah, thank you so much. Nir, obviously this is very easy to get started because we saw it all working in about 10 minutes, but are there first steps that you would recommend to people? Are there places you think they should start?
So as you've seen, like, you don't need to do anything, just 2 lines and you get observability. You should also annotate your workflows and tasks, so you get you can build actually complete traces, but you don't even have to do that. Just need to install the SDK, initialize it, and that's it. Connect it to whatever.
I always recommend people start with getting what they can completely automatically, right? And in this case, they're getting a lot. And then move on from there to say, hey, what do I know about my business and my operations that I can add to here to make this more useful to me?
Yeah, it makes sense. And we're still not supporting all LLM providers and all vector databases and all frameworks. So if anyone wants to contribute and help us build OpenLLMetry into a great framework, then would love for you to help.
Absolutely makes sense. Yeah, and I want people to check this out. You'll see links to the information to the documentation we just showed We didn't get questions in the chat, which is fantastic. We'll get questions, I'm sure, in the comments. I'll hit you up on the CNCF Slack, which everyone should be part of if you're at all passionate about that stuff. Do join us on our Slack. Also, Traceloop has a great Slack community, which you can check out. It's at the top of their GitHub as well, which you'll see linked down below. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. We will be back next week. And then as I end the stream, I'll just ask you